Hello and welcome to Talking with Fenby. My name is Jose Eric. I'm here with Daniel. And Daniel contacted me and wanted to talk a little bit about SI in the 6th and 8th slot. Let's start with the 8th slot. So, as he's pointed out to me, I've talked a lot about the polar slot and how SI plays out in the 7th. But how can we differentiate that from the 8th slot? That's the first question I'm interested in hearing his thoughts about. So, why don't we start there?
Yeah. Before I go into this, I just want to give a bit of an intro. Um, with this whole thing about, one of the reasons why I find, the typology very valid is because of the logical structure within it, right? And one of the reasons why I like your work so much is because of your insistence on the slots and how, for example, with Dave's superpowers, the whole, you know, FESC or TESC, etc. That wouldn't it's kind of not logical to have that, right? And how the whole idea of the slots kind of reinforces that. So specifically, what I was thinking of for like SI in the eighth slot is that you wouldn't have the issue of not being able to remember specific examples. Perhaps you could do that. However, when making an argumentation or trying to prove a point, um, and trying to specifically explain how you know things, there still is a lack of your own experience when explaining that, or a lack of specific examples when explaining that trend.
Well, that's a good notion right there in distinguishing between how do you know things versus what do you remember. And it it is the case, I think, that for INFJ and um, I guess I'll say less about INTJ because I think they have a different kind of relationship with it a bit. But for INFJ, that they're more capable, probably, of the. I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's something I'd like to gather data on. I don't really have a clear understanding of how that would be, but it's certainly an interesting notion and worth making the distinction. It's certainly something I can include in questionings in the future. So, and what do you think? Or do you have? First of all, do you have any other thoughts about eighth slot, and or do you want to go ahead and talk about sixth slot a little bit?
So, um, just more on the eighth slot. I the four main slots. So dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior. They're very well talked about, and they're very well explained. Same with the polar and the sixth slot. However, I think the slots that are least explored are perhaps the ignoring and the eighth slot.
Hmm.
However, and I'll go on with this later. I'll expand on it later. I like a lot of the stuff you've said about the ignoring function, because a lot I think is very true. But with specifically with sixth, I think the person could be very well capable of remembering experiences and remembering examples. However, still when they explain how they know things, there will be kind of a resistance to using specific examples or to using their past experience, because it's something they could perfectly do. However, they don't, when if you argue like that or explain how you know things, perhaps they still don't like it, even though they see it very clearly. They're like, no, it's not that.
Well, I've been thinking some about the quote unquote demonstrative function or sixth slot, countervalued I often call it, but how it's pretty easy to understand how FE demonstrative looks. You can see an ESFP trying to control everyone's perceptions, kind of. In ENFP, you can see demonstrative FE in a more nuanced way, where they're kind of successfully controlling people's perceptions with demonstrating care for other people's feelings, rather than directly saying "I care about your perceptions." But regardless, there's demonstrative FE. You can see demonstrative FI, like Kimberly. She's somebody who thinks my jokes are funny and laughs at them, and she's always demonstrating to me how she feels, and that's important for an ENTP as their dual, so they get that demonstrative thing. But it's a lot harder to understand demonstrative SI, or I even get demonstrative NI, because demonstrative NI is like they somebody like an INTP. They're constantly collapsing down to singularities, other people's shit, but refusing to collapse down to singularities in terms of committing to anything themselves. Now, I don't quite get how that plays out as demonstrative, you know?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of SI, I've always seen it as homeostasis. Whenever I've thought of SI, I've kind of seen it as like a homeostasis. So perhaps the way that these types, the which counter value SI demonstrated is maybe they kind of like order. They kind of like an order in things.
They demonstrate
And
a need for predictability, perhaps. That's true.
yeah. They do prefer predictability, and at the same time, they don't like ambiguity. They don't like ambiguity, and that kind of reinforces them liking the order, the predictability. So I think that's what fits into it.
Okay. Well, I think in general, there needs to be kind of a video where I go like, in this slot it looks like this, 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 because that's basically what I'm trying to narrow down in typing people, is figure out clear distinctions where I can nail down a slot or narrow it down to one or two slots, so that it becomes logically necessary, the conclusion that I've drawn.
Yeah.
Right, and SINI is a good leverage point in general. TIFI can be, but I'm having to learn about FI in general. It's tricky. So you were type policed by me, apparently, and
Yeah.
you claimed in the video that I type policed to be what?
That you typed me as INTP.
What did you say you were?
When I saw the video, or I'm sorry, when I was in the video, I think at the end I agreed, but I've come to the conclusion I think I'm probably a different type. So
I don't think you're an INTP based on my immediate conversation with you here.
yeah.
Okay, so I mean, but my question is basically, did I put you in type jail or not?
No.
I didn't put you in type jail. So that just
No.
means I didn't think there was enough evidence to arrest you. Not necessarily that I thought you were an INTP for sure.
Yeah.
But so what type do you think you are?
So I think I might be a TE Dom. And the thing that makes me think that is because of what you've said about the ignoring function. So first of all, one of the things about the ignoring function is that, or what I've noticed, what I've learned from you as well, is that you're very critical of things that ignore your ignoring function. You're very critical of things that kind of don't value your ignoring function. So, for example, with me, I remember in that video, I was talking a lot about me being able to pinpoint logical inconsistencies in things, right? And the thing about that is that I'm actually very critical when things are not logically consistent, when things kind of don't make, are kind of logically not sound. However, after reflecting on it, I'm much more attuned to how things work than that actual logical consistency of it. So
Okay.
again, yeah.
Well, do you think your tool function is SI or NI?
That's the thing. Because that's kind of what I'm very unsure of, because the thing is, and one of the other reasons why I don't think I'm INTP is because I do not think, I'm definitely very sure that I'm not SC polar.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it may sound odd to the viewing audience or to you or to anybody that a person would have trouble telling whether they're a tool function or a polar in
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
But this is not actually that uncommon. I typed somebody earlier. When was it? Yesterday, I think it was yesterday morning, and and he kept going. He wanted. He was very difficult to convince that for sure, he was an INTP and not an INFP. Now, there's somebody who's going. I'm not sure. I don't have my A slot function as my dominant. It's very obvious to me, but that's just part and parcel of the TI dominant function is that it's very questiony, you know. So okay, if you think you're a TE dom, I mean, you're looking to see whether or not you're SI polar or NI polar. I mean, what's your experience in the recent events and specific details test? When if I were to ask you about, like, do you remember a time recently when somebody did something insignificant like dropping their fork at a restaurant and you had a little laugh about it, or something along those lines that you can detail for me?
Honestly, no, and that's the thing, and that's why I was leaning towards ENTJ. And something I do want to say about SI polar is it's not that we like the thing with examples, coming up with examples. I don't think it's like impossible for us to think of examples. It's very difficult.
Well, I mean, the issue is whether or not you retain how much of the source of the lesson you retain. So everybody gets lessons from life. The most efficient way to store those lessons from life is to keep as little as possible of what what the source of the lesson was. Because after all, the only thing you're really going to use from it is the lesson, purportedly. But only polar people are so heavily leaning towards introverted intuition over introverted sensing as a knowing function that they literally can't remember any of the details of the source thing. It's not like it's necessarily a good or a bad thing or anything. It's just sort of, it's like I literally can't use my own feelings to make judgments on things. It may sound weird to other people, but it's just how it goes. If you ask me, well, decide based on what you like and what you want and whatever. Unless it's really obvious to me, I'm gonna have trouble with that one. So the thing is, what I don't understand, I'm sure there's a corresponding thing, like like works on real time and it works across time like any other function. I have no concept at all of the non-real time FI, none. So what's happening here for you is the same thing. You have concepts of the real time SI. You know when somebody stabs you in the leg with a knife, you're going to be like, I did feel that. That hurt. I
Yeah,
didn't like that. That's real time SI of a sort. You will remember to get water before you die of dehydration. You have basic awareness levels.
yeah,
It's the across time part where you lose you lose functionality that lands within the normal range, quote unquote, as does everybody in their polar. So it's interesting, and it really goes a long way, I think, to validating the cognitive function model in general, because that's something that other models don't really explain or account for, anticipate, or predict. Whereas the cognitive function model would predict that, and there it is.
yeah, yeah. And another thing I wanted to say about SI is that, and I kind of wanted to ask you as well. I mean, which part of SI do you see as more prominent? Because there's two, there's a part of SI that's kind of about memory, about your experiences, okay? But then there's, another aspect of SI that's more about taking care of yourself, your internal homeostasis. Do you take care of yourself? Are you very attuned to your when you need to eat, when you need to sleep, and specifically the homeostasis part, I'm very bad at. I'm
Okay.
really good.
Okay.
So,
Well,
yeah,
look, and there's two kinds. It's important to remember that SI manifests in a couple of different ways. So, on its real time level, it manifests in homeostasis. On its metaphysical level, it manifests as two different kind of things. which is one, keeping track of ideas, plans, in other words, metaphysical work. You're probably pretty okay at that one. But then the other manifestation is the high resolution memories. That is, remembering what actually happened at the restaurant. Well, first we walked in, and then there was the waitress came up, and she dropped a pen, so she had to bend over and she had to pick it up, like like that kind of shit. You're very apparently ENTJs are very bad at that first one. The second one, I suspect, although I've never really made this distinction before or tested for it. The second one, where you're keeping track of your schedule and stuff, that's also SI. You're probably a little better at that one. Although you use tools to facilitate it, I'm sure, like a schedule book or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
And that's one of the nice things about SI is we can really bolster it with simple tools very easily. And then the third one, being the homeostasis one, you're probably very bad at that as well, which means basically, like me with my FI and its real-time dimension or aspect, I notice it when it's really big. And I don't notice it before. ENTJs are famous for going until they crash or get sick or something.
Yeah.
So
Or ignore the symptoms very, very easily.
right, and
Yeah.
it has to do with being a TE Dom whose implicit frame for everything in life is that it be a problem that they can solve. It doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, but it'd be a goal or a problem to solve or a goal to attain or something like that, somewhere in that range of clarity. You want clarity on, particularly on the goal part, so that you can direct your full native attention of solvency to attaining that. The thing you're seeking from a significant other as an ENTJ is somebody to provide you that clarity on the goal. I've got a lot of FI. My name's Julie. I really, really want this. Can you please get this for me? And now you realize, oh, okay, now I want that too. Oh, there's my FI. I found it. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
Because it's the only
Yeah.
it's the only way to link to your individual self. You don't have SI, so you only link through FI. Vice versa for me. The only way for me to link to my individual particular self is SI. It's not to pay attention to how I feel about things, but rather to pay attention to my, drinking water and being rah-rah and getting cozy and taking a bath and that stuff. So,
Yeah.
that's how I know that's when, it's like, for example, in general, and there's probably an equivalent for you too. When I go in my most native realm, which is basically YouTube, for too long a period of time without returning to the real world, I get this sort of kind of feeling, I don't know exactly how to describe it. And it's just, what it is myself saying, ground yourself. And that means I have to go back to SI. For you, it's go back to FI.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because I kind of feel the same way about that, but it's not in an SI sense. It's in an FI sense of kind of the relations I have with people. So, this is someone who's very important to me, and I'm kind of putting it to the side. This is something that's very important to me, yet I'm not realizing that that's what I like. And, that's been the basic trend in my life for me for a long time, that I don't know what I like. So...
Well, the other thing to remember about 1 and 4, TE for you and FI, is that the only time you can stop TEing in life is when you fully wallow in FI. It's the only time. The rest of the time you'll be TEing. Even when you're fully wallowing in FI, some TE will break through and go, well, I could solve this problem with it. I stop solving and fucking feel it. For me, same thing with SI. The only time I can stop extrovertedly intuiting in my own head is about like taking a bath or something and go, okay, just relax. Oh, that feels so good. Right. That's the only time I can stop extrovertedly intuiting. So as far as I'm concerned, from my experience, I'm extrapolating out a general rule here, but I haven't heard anybody dispute it yet. Basically, the only time you can turn off your number 1 is by going wholly into your number 4.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Also, another thing that's very, very good trick to test whether someone, has SINE or NISC is just ask them to tell you a story. Because, the thing about NESI is they have an amazing way of telling stories. And they go into the story mode, especially with, SI tool users. They go into that story mode and they go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, NISE is much more blunt
Daniel,
usually.
Daniel, tell me a story.
Hmm. Today I ate tacos for lunch. They're very good. They were very good.
That's an amazing, amazing story. I tell you, it hit me right here in the heart. It
Yeah.
really emotionally engaged me because I too have a special relationship with tacos. Well, that was pretty great storytelling there, Daniel. I think you well proved your own point. Um,
Yeah.
so, what is it? Do you just think that seems pointless? I guess it's countervalued extroverted intuition. I mean, the thing is, what do you think about demonstrative extroverted intuition? Does that mean to you that when when problems require new ideas, you're there to provide them? You don't want to hear other people's new ideas because it'll interfere with your existing solution.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it's just something that's I don't know. The way I think of any is it's something very private. Like I think that's a very big difference between countervalued and like dominant. Dominant is very public. People will see the any very clearly. Countervalued, not really. I think it's much more private.
Especially you call it private. I would think that I guess that makes sense because extroverted intuition is metaphysical, and your a your metaphysical part is NI. So your unconscious tool function is kind of serving that a little bit, and um, it's an unconscious countervalued tool function of sorts. That's sixth slot, and when and so for you, I think you understand the metaphysical world to be that which you don't really operate on the external metaphysical field very much. I've talked about there being four fields, right? External metaphysical, which is where I'm operating all the time. Internal metaphysical, which is where I'm operating when I'm not talking out loud, and then physical external, which is like stuff and shit in the world, and physical internal, which is your body. Okay, so it sounds to me like you're saying you keep your metaphysics on the internal field mostly. That you don't like to do the ideation externally.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm. Interesting. That would seem to run afoul of the idea of a demonstrative function. So it may not. The socionics. This is a socionics is a demonstrative function.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
seems to play out correctly for me with TE. I do seem to demonstrate like I don't mind. I demonstrate it when called upon, when appropriate. I like to go to tell people how to do shit, but I don't like people telling me how to do shit.
yeah, yeah,
I would say it makes sense with Kim's FI. She's demonstrating FI to me all the time. She's going through the world, but based on what you just
yeah.
said, it doesn't seem to make quite as much sense with extroverted intuition. So I don't know about that. I have
Here's
to
here's
explore
what
it
I will
further, I guess.
say. When I have to ideate, I will do it, and I'm not bad. However, for one, I'd rather I'd rather zoom in on an idea and fully see it grow. And another thing, what I mean by private is specifically, kind of the archetype of the ENTP is just someone very social, kind of someone very social who's just talking about ideas, ideas, ideas. That's kind of what I meant by private. With me, and with ENTJs in general, you don't really see that.
Right.
That's kind of
You think your ideas,
yeah,
but the point of them is not to communicate them. It's to see them implemented in the third slot as the hidden
yeah,
agenda.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's just not a good use of your time to spend just chit chatting about them.
yeah. Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Well, interesting. I mean, I think you successfully typed yourself as the ENTJ, and I think this has been an interesting video. I really like your suggestions too. They're very practical, as most ENTJ suggestions are. I like the fact that
Yeah,
you came in with a very finite number, an appropriate number of things to talk about, and effectively gave me tools that will turn out to be quite useful. Distinguishing between how you know and what you remember is important, and it's something I need to remember when I'm typing people. And it's like it also made me realize that there's a couple kinds of learning, right? So the kind of learning you do is the takeaway of lessons is metaphysical learning. But physical learning are things like playing the guitar, right? So you get better over time by repetition and practice. And there are certain things that lend themselves more to metaphysical learning and certain things that lend themselves more to physical learning. And so as a metaphysical learner, what that means is not just that you don't remember details. It means that you you do what you just described. You're narrowing in on important the determinant factor in everything as a means of applying your learning, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to think
Certainly.
about that further. It's a little muddled, but anyway. Um, Anything else before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to reinforce that. I mean, if I wanted to reinforce, the validity of this, man, because I think what makes it so valid again is the logical structure to it, really, and that's why it's so important that we think about the slots. Because I think that I don't know, I think that's one of the most important things about this. Because with Dave's superpowers, when I first started watching, the stuff in the theater, I thought it was kind of cool, but again, the slots, I think that's just very important. And so if it kind of messed up, it actually, I don't know, it might not work as well.
Right. Well, I just think that ultimately, with this kind of approach where we're talking about it openly, it's like it's the model is objective in the sense that its data is objective. Like we can all talk about it and see, confirm or deny within our own experiences whether or not that conforms with what we see in the world. When I have had a lot of people tell me they've given these various polar tests to various people, and most of it has been like, wow, surprisingly the same exact thing. Wow, it's repeatable. Um, the thing is, there's been a little bit of like, well, this person was a little on it. But by and large, it suggests that if nothing else, there's a deficit, skills deficit pool of people in a couple of different areas that are not named by anything other than cognitive functions, that aren't accounted for by anything other than cognitive functions, and aren't predicted by anything other than cognitive functions. I think that makes it like right there. It legitimizes it as the preferable alt in the status quo as far as explaining how human consciousness manifests throughout time, at least mechanically.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, obviously, there needs to be more work done to solidify it, and I'm sure that I continue to do all these testings too of typing people and everything, it's really it's helped me to become much better at understanding both functions and how to type people. So I think talking to everybody and saying, well, here's an idea, and implementing people's ideas like yours, and the idea of a sentence with the words out of order and see how long it takes them to put it in the right order and everything. That turns out, I think, to be mostly TI rather than anything else. But anyway, it's an interesting idea, and it tests out. You start to define the scope of each of the functions too, right? Really carefully, and say, well, this function manifests here like this and here like this, and the aspects and all that kind of shit, and you consistently see the results in each of those sort of sub slot kind of narrowers to always be the same one of these patterns, then it's pretty definitive.
yeah, yeah. Another thing I wanted to say about distinguishing NI versus SI is, I mean, I think I told you in the email when I talked to my ISFJ friend, right? Which it's interesting because he's supposedly my conflicting type, yet we're very good friends. Uh, when I try to explain just a general trend, or just I try to focus in on just a singular idea, singular thing, it's amazing, he always relates it to his experience or a past example, or, and like, I try to tell him, fine, but like, can't you see what I'm talking about? Can't you see this, without, having to relate it to your experience? Like, can't you see the trend? Can't you see what's going on? Yeah.
Not really. Their NI only
Yeah.
serves their SI. It doesn't work the other way around. But
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
does work the other way around is if they make predictions, and you ask them why they're predicting that, the real source of it will always be because something similar happened before with something similar.
Yeah, yeah. And with when I make predictions specifically, it's not necessarily on how things happened in the past. It's more how things are in the current moment. That
Right.
is what helps you make the prediction. You
Sure.
know,
Because
just because something happened in the past, you know, there was a certain pattern in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen again. It's
it's
really the thing.
because SI and NE are about time, and NI and SE are about timing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
SI is it's like using your time for your own body and stuff like that, and NE is like time. It doesn't exist at all. There's no such thing as timing, and we never have to act. And then SE's like, I need to know, but I'm gonna pull the trigger when I'm gonna pull the trigger, dog. And then NI's like, chill, chill. I'll tell you exactly when to pull the trigger. I got this whole
yeah,
scene figured out already. I can
yeah,
tell
yeah,
you without even watching. So
yeah,
that's the difference, basically.
yeah,
And speaking of timing, that seems like a good spot to end this video. So
yeah.
I'd like very much to thank Daniel for participating and making it possible
Thank you.
and suggesting that we make it. And you're welcome to try to have a video made with me as well by emailing me and suggesting a topic or something. And chances are I'll be totally down to do it. So thanks again. And for the viewing audience, please don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.